Someone walked into the room and you had already formed an opinion before they finished their first sentence. Maybe before they said anything at all. The way they carried themselves, the speed of their eyes, something about the energy that arrived slightly before they did. And you did not decide to form that opinion. It simply appeared, fully constructed before your conscious mind had a chance to weigh in on the process. Here is why understanding that moment matters far more than most people ever examine. The ability to read and evaluate another person within seconds is not a character flaw. It is not prejudice by default, and it is not a habit that makes you shallow or unfair. It is a deeply embedded neurological process that shapes every professional opportunity you pursue or pass on, every relationship you walk toward or away from before it begins, every room you feel immediately safe or immediately cautious inside, and every person you dismiss or invest in based on information your brain processed so fast it never asked for your permission. If you have ever formed an instant opinion about someone that turned out to be exactly right or exactly wrong, and never quite understood how your brain got there so quickly, this is going to explain the entire mechanism underneath that experience and why it has been operating inside you your entire life without a single formal introduction. There is a specific word people use for this when they want to make it sound like a problem. They call it judgmental. They say it the way you say closed-minded, like it is evidence of a limited perspective, like the person who forms quick impressions is doing something intellectually lazy that more evolved thinkers have outgrown. They frame it as something to overcome, something to apologize for. The person who admits they size someone up in under 10 seconds gets looked at as though they have just confessed to something slightly embarrassing, something that polite, open-minded people do not do. What almost never gets said in that conversation is this: every single person in that room did exactly the same thing. They just have not examined it closely enough to know it. The difference is not between people who judge quickly and people who do not. The difference is between people who are aware of the process and people who are running it completely unconsciously while believing they are operating on pure open-minded observation. What we are actually talking about is one of the most fundamental and thoroughly documented processes in all of cognitive neuroscience. A speed of social evaluation that the human brain performs not because it is being careless, but because it is being extraordinarily efficient. The psychology of people who instantly judge others within seconds is not a study in bias alone. It is a study in how the human perceptual system was built, what it was built to accomplish, and why it performs this function faster than any conscious reasoning process could possibly match. There is far more precision and far more history inside that split-second impression than most people ever get told. And the people who form the quickest judgments are almost never the people the cultural conversation assumes them to be. Psychologist Nalini Ambady at Harvard University conducted a landmark series of studies on what she called thin slices of behavior, the remarkably small windows of observed interaction from which people draw surprisingly accurate social conclusions. Her research found that judgments formed from as little as 2 seconds of silent video footage predicted outcomes: teacher effectiveness, surgical malpractice risk, therapeutic alliance quality, with accuracy rates that were statistically comparable to judgments formed after extended observation and full information access. 2 seconds, no words, no context. Just the human perceptual system doing something it has been doing for the entirety of human evolutionary history. Princeton psychologist Alexander Todorov extended this research specifically into facial evaluation, publishing findings that showed people form reliable impressions of trustworthiness, dominance, and competence from a human face in as little as 100 milliseconds, faster than the conscious mind can form a sentence about what it is seeing. These impressions, Todorov found, were not random noise. They showed consistent patterns across thousands of participants and predicted real social outcomes, including election results, financial trust decisions, and sentencing recommendations in legal proceedings. The brain is not guessing when it forms an instant impression. It is running a calculation built from every social data point it has ever accumulated across the entire span of a person's lived experience, and delivering a conclusion before consciousness has the opportunity to review the work. What that means in plain human terms is this: when you form an instant judgment about someone, you are not being reckless. You are accessing a perceptual system so fast and so deeply trained that slowing it down would actually require more effort than running it produces. This capacity was not constructed in adulthood. Its foundations were laid much earlier, Through years of watching, absorbing, and cataloging social information in environments where reading other people quickly was not a personality preference but a practical necessity. For a child in an unpredictable household, learning to read a parent's mood from the sound of their footsteps before they entered the room was not hypervigilance as a diagnosis. It was intelligence as a survival strategy. Learning to assess whether a situation was safe from the body language of the people in it before any words were exchanged was the fastest available information in an environment where words were not always reliable. The nervous system absorbed that training completely. It built a library of social pattern recognition so refined that it became automatic. And that library did not close when the childhood environment was eventually left behind. It simply kept operating in new rooms, with new people, in professional and personal contexts that bear no surface resemblance to where the training began. The person who forms the fastest impressions is very often the person who needed that skill the most at the earliest point in their development. The speed is not a character trait, it is an inheritance. This deserves to be said plainly and without qualification. Forming rapid impressions of other people is not morally inferior to forming slower ones. It is not evidence of a closed mind or a limited emotional range. And the person who takes longer to form an impression of someone is not necessarily more accurate in their final assessment. They are simply running the same underlying process at a different conscious speed with more deliberate narrative layered on top of it. Different people, shaped by different developmental environments and different levels of social threat exposure, develop different relationships with the speed at which they process social information. Neither speed is the correct one. The brain that moves fast in social evaluation and the brain that moves slowly are both solving the same fundamental problem. They are just using different processing architectures built by different histories. Here is the layer that very few people in this pattern ever reach. People who form instant judgments are frequently, not always, but with notable consistency, among the most accurate social readers in any environment they enter. Because the thin slice perceptual system has been running and calibrating across decades of social experience, its error rate on genuinely significant social information, threat, deception, misalignment between stated intention and actual motivation, tends to be lower than the error rate of purely conscious analytical reasoning applied to the same situations. The paradox is this: the very speed that makes the judgment look like a bias is also what makes it, in many cases, more accurate than a slower, more deliberate conclusion reached through careful reasoning. The quiet cost is that the system does not always update quickly when the initial read was wrong. A first impression formed in 100 milliseconds can quietly resist correction for far longer than the evidence warrants. The hidden strength is that this person almost never walks into a genuinely dangerous social situation without some part of their perceptual system having already sent a signal. They may not always listen to it, but the signal was there. If you recognize yourself in this, here's what is simply and plainly true. You are not judgmental in the way that word gets used as an accusation. You are not shallow. You are not failing at fairness by having a perceptual system that processes social information at the speed it was built to process it. The impressions arrive fast because something in your history made fast social reading a necessary and practiced skill. The fact that those impressions sometimes arrive before you would consciously choose them to is not evidence of bias as a moral failing. It is evidence of a system that is extraordinarily well-trained and extraordinarily fast. Your experience makes complete sense. The quick read is not a character problem. It is a perceptual inheritance, one that carries real value and one that, like any sophisticated tool, works best when the person using it knows what they are actually holding. If you want to start working with this pattern rather than against it, not suppressing the instant read, not pretending it does not happen, but using it more deliberately. Here is the one shift that actually changes something real. After you form an instant impression of someone, give it a label. Not out loud, internally. One word: trustworthy, guarded, performing, genuine. Naming the impression the moment it arrives does two things simultaneously. It prevents the impression from operating completely beneath conscious awareness where it cannot be examined or updated. And it creates a specific, trackable prediction that you can consciously verify or revise as more information becomes available. You are not fighting the system. You are bringing it above the surface where it can work with you rather than entirely around you. That distinction changes not just how you see people, but how accurately you respond to what you see. If this reached something real in you, there is more worth understanding about how this rapid social evaluation process shapes the specific decisions you make in rooms before you are consciously aware a decision is being made. Who you approach, who you avoid, what opportunities you move toward, and which ones you leave before they have fully formed. That architecture runs through more of your daily life than most people ever trace back to its source. And understanding it clearly, not as a flaw to manage, but as a system to know, is the kind of thing that quietly changes the quality of every social environment you walk into for the rest of your life.